Alright, so what I wanted to do today was talk about Resident Evil 5, more so the remake, and a little bit of a concern I have with the remake, and it was a present concern with the 4 remake, and it's more so a thing with the 5 remake. Before I even get started, I do want to say Resident Evil 5 is probably one of my favourite games in the series, and probably one of my favourite games in general. I know that's not like an opinion that everybody has, but I do have a lot of fun memories with the game. I play through it every now and again, as much as I can, and I sometimes just hop on and do like the mercenaries mode and stuff. I think it's a solid experience, and it has its issues. I'm not saying it's a perfect game. I have issues with it, and one of those is something I'm talking about today. But I like the game a lot, so this is not a dig to the game as a whole, or people who may like it even more than myself. But the footage in the background kind of explains kind of what I'm going to go over. But Resident Evil 5 is definitely more of an action game than 4, and I'm not saying that 4 isn't an action game. Like, if you play 4, original 4, it does ramp up near the end, and I think 5 does too, but it's more consistent throughout. 4 feels very toned down and more old school-esque until about 75% of the way through. But Resident Evil 5, it has moments throughout the whole game where it's more action focused, but then in the last again 25% of the game, it really ramps up, and it's been done in multiple games. Village does it as well. But obviously Village is very much a kind of successor to 4, so it does follow the same formula. But with 5, it's a problem. Mainly because, as you can probably tell from the gameplay, a lot of what the end game does is kind of turn the game from a action survival game, which, to be honest, in the first half I would say it probably is, because the weapons need upgrading and ammo can be a bit scarce every now and again. But the last part of the game floods you with ammo, floods you with healing, and it kind of becomes a cover shooter, as you can probably tell, because a lot of the enemies you fight near the end of the game use actual guns, and I know that's something that is, to me at least, a bit of a problem, because it doesn't suit it that well. I know that obviously in 4 and 5 it's not really a zombie virus, it's a parasite, and it does like enhance people, but they're still using guns and shit. And I think that kind of throws you out of it a little bit, at least in my opinion. Now, when I used to play as a kid, like with friends and stuff, I really didn't mind it. I thought it was really, it was fresh, because you were fighting like a lot of melee type enemies a lot throughout the first half of the game, and then when it kind of changed into weapons and stuff like guns, it does kind of change the flow a bit, which is nice, and makes it a little bit more difficult. But kind of like growing up and, playing these games more, and also kind of like looking at them more, because I do make content on the games now, it is a problem point, and I do kind of want to take a moment to talk about the 4 remake. So obviously the island in 4 and 4 remake is kind of where the action ramps up in that game more so than anywhere else. But just off the top of my head, looking back at the original island, there were so many more over the top action pieces, like when you're sat on the back of like the big construction vehicle, actually driving it, and loads of things are chasing you in trucks and stuff. You've got like the section near the very end where you got to deal with like a bunch of minigun enemies, and they're just flowing enemies at you consistently. A lot of that was removed, and while there is still kind of enemies in 4 remake that use weapons, they're not as consistent. Like, there's crossbows and a couple of rocket launchers, but other than that, you've got like the big brute guys with the pig mess have like the miniguns that do run out, and you can kind of disable them so they just can't use them. And that feels better to me than just having like the big Gatling gun guys from the original game. And yeah, those Gatling gun guys did come back in Resident Evil 5, and they came back in bigger numbers. And again, the amount of enemies that you fight in 5 using weaponry, like guns at least, is a little bit more extreme than it is in 4. And I think that does need a change in the remake. I think a lot of what they'll do is probably going to be in the same vein as how Resident Evil 4 did it, where they cut out a lot of the set pieces that were really over the top. There's a couple in this game that really do spring to mind. There's one actually coming up in the footage quite quickly. It's one where you kind of like in this factory type area, and you've got to like go up the conveyor belts that are covered in explosive barrels and stuff like that, and that is a bit ridiculous, I'd say. Even the section you're seeing now, it's not a big area by any means, but it happens multiple times in the game where it just throws lickers at you, like loads of them. And if you look back at like Resident Evil 2 or any other game where lickers are present, there's not that many. Like, there's like 1 or 2, and you don't really see any more than that at one given time. Like, I think the most lickers you see just off memory in the 2 remakes specifically at once is probably 2. But there's a corridor like this where it's like 4 or 5. There's the elevator section before this part where they're like coming through the corridor and there's loads of them. And I think that's a bit unnecessary, as well as the bit just before you fight Jill. And there's fucking loads of them. Like, that's kind of... It's kind of ridiculous. Again, I hope they're kind of like aware of it. I know Resident Evil 5 was kind of... I think a lot of people kind of forgave it in 4, because it was more action focused, but it still had that kind of feel of survival horror, especially like for most of the game. I think they'd really tone it down and make it feel a little bit more like the older games. With the remake, I honestly think that the remake has less action in it. Obviously with the end of the game, like the final act, it's going to ramp up the action. It's going to be a bit more intense. But 4 did that more so at the end than anything else. And I can probably kind of see the argument of the castle in the original game being very action focused. There's a lot of action rooms, but they were removed for the most part in the remake. So I think there was a lot of pieces in 5 that would also be removed early on. One part that comes to mind is probably like the Humvee section where you're on the turrets. That will probably go. But yeah, I really do think that the last part of 5 really needs to tone down. It gets a bit silly, it gets a bit extreme. But overall, kind of what I'm saying is, I, again, really like 5, and I hope the remake is done well. But at the same time, more so with this one than the 4 remake, they really need to look at the action and go, okay, what do we need to keep in to keep the flow going? And what sections do we need to remove or change in some way to make them kind of feel a little bit more grounded and a lot less like B-movie action sequence? Because there is a lot of moments like that in 5, and the charm is there. Like, I still appreciate it in this game. This game is very, very cheesy, I think, but that's kind of why I like it as well. But again, with how the remakes are going and how they're more grounded and serious and stuff like that, I do think they'll probably change a lot of the action sequences in 5 dramatically. But that's just kind of my opinion, and that's kind of what I would like them to do with it. But yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. As always, guys, do let me know what you think of what I've been talking about in this video. If you can think of any specific areas of the game you'd like changed, do let me know in the comments. It's really interesting to see, what you guys want to kind of see in these games, or your own personal thoughts about any of the games, really. But yeah, thank you for coming by. Remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more Resident Evil content to try and post as often as possible. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video.